All right, so you heard a little bit of my story. What was your path in a deeper way to knowing about this Christos clarity way of being, and what did you overcome on the way?
Well, I think like all of us on the path, the thing that I had to overcome was myself and not my soul self, because that just is, but all of the identity constructs that I perceived as myself that was layered on top of that. They were built of abandonment and programming of conditional love and even harm, and just created a lot of suffering and separation within my psyche that eventually manifested as obsessive compulsive disorder. And I spent like 15 years of my life severely dysregulated by OCD, living in a fear-based delusional reality. And the type of OCD I had is actually called scrupulosity, and it's all about morality and religion, and it was based in this hellfire brimstone conception of good versus evil. And because I had such deep abandonment wounding from childhood, I had this conception of life not being safe, or that I wouldn't be protected. And this was really became embedded into this whole fear-based religious programming OCD construct, where I believed that I was essentially separate from God and I was inherently bad or wrong, and that I wasn't safe. I never felt safe psychically. I always felt like I was under attack of some sort of darkness that created an incredible amount of dysregulation in my body. I disconnected from my body, and then I was only living in my mind space for a solid 15 years, and not in a mind sanctuary, but in a very fear-based, neurotic, insecure, deeply disturbed, uncomfortable texture of consciousness. And in 2019, I hit rock bottom and got to the point where I was like, God, you gotta show me my way out of this dark hole. Like, there has to be a way. And, I had bought into all of the narratives of the Western medical model, that I'm diagnosed with OCD, that I'm gonna have it for life. I can go to therapy, they can treat symptoms, but it wasn't something that I could cure. And once I hit rock bottom, I was like, yo, we gotta cure this or this ain't it. Like, I'm straight up not having a good time having this human experience. And from there, I was truly gifted a series of miracles, one being the Kabbalion, which outlines the 7 Hermetic principles, which for me is the philosophical and spiritual framework that I was able to use to go into that process of cleaning my windows and start reorganizing things in my internal sanctuary in a more harmonious way, because one of the core teachings of the Kabbalion, the 7 Hermetic principles, this sevenfold Hermetic path, is the axiom I'm sure many of us have heard of: as above, so below, as within, so without, which points us to the remembrance that God is also inside of us. And that completely shifted my worldview, because instead of having to outsource my power to something outside of myself and wait for something to come save me, it made me realize, like, oh, the God consciousness that I've been praying for is actually inside of me too, and I can activate that power and change this narrative. And these principles are also the principles of, they're often thought of as the first lesson of alchemy, of the alchemical path. And the beautiful thing about alchemy is that we're transmuting things. And so there's an opportunity to transform one thing into another. And this shifted everything for me, because instead of OCD being a curse that I had to live with, it became something that I learned I would be able to transmute. These principles helped me architect OCD into a rite of passage of like, oh, I've been suffering for 15 years. I've really been in this. And that was the beginning, middle, and there gets to be an end to this. And so it really shifted my worldview. And then it was actually through my studies of Hermeticism and the occult sciences that I came back into studying Christ consciousness. And because I had so much fear-based religious trauma that manifested as OCD, I was averse to Christianity. I was averse to Jesus. I didn't even want to talk about Jesus. My best friend Mia called me and probably like 2018 or so, and she was like, "Girl, Jesus is the way." And I was like, "No, it's certainly not it." Like it was like a hard no for me. But then of course I so beautifully got to just eat my words right up off of the floor a couple years later as I, started to understand more with divine messages I was receiving and also some texts that I was reading, that in my belief of Jesus, this is a man that very much understood the seven Hermetic principles and the ancient Gnostic alchemies. And through that path of devotion, of cleaning the windows within the self, of making himself clear, of freeing himself of any obstruction to love that existed within his system, he was able to straighten his antenna and then receive this incredibly strong Wi-Fi signal of Christ consciousness in and through his being. Mm-hmm. And that he really did this to show us what is possible. Not to confess him as our Lord and Savior outside of ourselves because we're inherently bad or wrong or sinful and need saving, which was exactly the ideological complex that caused so much suffering and division within myself for the majority of my life. And so grateful to move on from that chapter, but that was intense. That was really challenging, to now being able to understand that the path of following Christ, the path of following Jesus, the path of seeing Jesus as a role model is to walk in his footsteps and do that work within ourselves. And so I made that commitment in 2019 when I hit rock bottom of like, there has to be a way out. God, show me the way. I will walk it. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, I will walk it. And within about 2 years, I was able to cure myself of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And that was just the beginning. So yeah, I'm extraordinarily grateful for the path.
Yeah, you're a spiritual warrior for real. So what is Neuro Sovereignty? Because I'd love to hear more about, like, as you cured yourself, how you were able to turn that into something that could support other people. And I know you started that business almost like a year ago, not too long, more than a year ago. Just tell me about Neuro Sovereignty.
Yeah, so Neuro Sovereignty it's really more of a mission than anything else, and it's a mission that I steward with my dear sister Alaya Moon that is all about really teaching people how to become their own sanctuaries, which is exactly the conversation we're having, about tending to the internal faculties and becoming the mind, body, spiritual system, sanctuary that you actually want to be living and existing within. And as we have discussed, I was very much student number one of this path. And about 2 years ago, I was called onto this very mythic journey of taking everything that I learned about unlocking my cognition from cages that it was trapped in because of obsessive compulsive disorder, and then all of my studies in graduate school of cognitive psychology and my studies of meditation and neuroscience, and how I could weave all of these teachings that completely transformed my own life and then generalize them into a framework that I could give to other people to teach them how to resurrect themselves into a sanctuary. But I knew there was a part of the puzzle missing because my codes were very, very spiritual and very mental. And the term came through from God, Neuro Sovereignty. Neuro is neurology, nervous system, neurons. And the nervous system is the brain. And then it's all of the nerves that innervate through the body. And so I knew there was a piece of the body that had to come through. And then I met Alaya Moon, and she brought through all of the body codes and everything just like laid on top of each other in this immaculate blueprint. And at the foundation of all of it, in order to be a sanctuary, you need to trust yourself and genuinely love yourself and not be afraid to look into the darkness. And that's how so many people live, because we grow up in a world that really has set the illusion of perfectionism, as we were talking about earlier.
Right.
because of that, people try to suppress parts of their past or the things they perceive as shameful or the things that they feel guilty about, when at the end of the day, like, we're all fucking human and we all have our shit and it all stings, and this is part of the human process. And so it's really delayering those pieces, because it's how we talk to ourselves at the end of the day that makes us a sanctuary. Plus, how do we feel in our nervous system? How do we feel in our body? Plus, are we connected to God? Do we feel one with all things, or do we have these codes of separation? And all of this is to say that trauma healing must be approached from various levels, mainly the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. And things really manifest from the most subtle and then into the most dense dimensions. So we want to work on things spiritually. And so in Neuro Sovereignty, we really guide people through the 7 Hermetic principles to give a spiritual upgrade, changing the perception of why we are here, what is our spiritual understanding, what is our connection to God, as God is as above, so below, within, and in this moment. So we update the spiritual perception of life, and then we pull that down into the mind. Okay, how do we actually make that run on people's lives so it's changing the way they're seeing and perceiving life in real time? So we use cognitive psychology, facets of neurolinguistic programming, different mindset shifts. I really call this piece of the puzzle mindset architecture. It's the piece that I probably love the most because I'm a very nerdy mind girl. And then we take all of that. Okay, we go from the spiritual, the most subtle, then to the next most dense region, which is the mental plane. But all of this is only so powerful as it's actually embodied, because we're here, human beings having our human experience in these spaceship body suits. And so all the codes we collect up here, those aren't actually going to do us much good unless they're actually in the body. And just as the mind has memories, the nervous system has implicit memories too, of benevolent interactions, but also of trauma. And so there's a deep process of how do we remove imprints of trauma from the body so that we can actually make space for these higher codes to download. And removing the trauma from the body is one piece. That's step number 1. And we have to train ourselves to literally hold more love, to open back up, to be able to hold pleasure. And so we do both parts of that in Neuro Sovereignty in terms of the body, the releasing the trauma and then expanding the system to hold love and pleasure. And yeah, like I mentioned, I was the first student of this process. I am still a student of this process daily. I am learning more every day. And yeah, now I feel like my spiritual, mental, and physical dimensions are coming more and more and more into alignment. And that's what a sanctuary is. It's being in that divine alignment.
Amazing. This is a really good example of how our interactions go a lot of the time, is just like letting someone go on a channeling spree and just receiving the joy of their God expression. You know, you're so eloquent, and I can tell you're so learned in all the different modalities, and that the things you say only come through wisdom. So it's just an honor to be witness to you and all that you are, and also a blessing for anyone else who has come upon this to be able to tap into what you've learned and codified with Neuro Sovereignty. So congratulations on that. I'm excited for the continued expansion of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that was a little bit of a deeper dive on what our stories are, respectively. And in episodes to come, we'll be exploring different facets of integrating these energies that we discussed into the human experience. The next one is about how to be an embodied expression of Christ, and what the somatic experience is of integrating those codes, and what is the process for making space internally, because we are infinite beings internally. Isn't that crazy to think about? On the spiritual plane, is that we're infinite internally, even though we have a finite body. So reconciling concepts like that and the actual process is what we'll be exploring in the next episode.
Stay tuned, fam. Much love.
Peace out.